The school commons erupted in panic as a teenage boy in a trench coat raised a rifle and opened fire. 2 young girls fell instantly, and within minutes 7 more were left injured on the floor. That boy was 16-year-old Luke Woodham. He was born in 1981 in Pearl, Mississippi. On the surface, his childhood looked ordinary. Beneath that, he carried emotional wounds that shaped his teen years. As a young boy, he was overweight and wore thick glasses. He often seemed awkward compared with other children. His mother, Mary Ann, kept his hair cut short and dressed him in old-fashioned clothes. That made him look older than his age. Other kids used that to pick on him. Bullying became a regular part of his life. He was mocked for his looks. He was teased about his weight. He was labeled weird. By high school, the teasing grew worse. He was sometimes shoved or humiliated in front of others. Each incident added to his bitterness. His parents divorced when he was in 6th grade. That change hit him hard. He blamed himself for the separation. He began to sink into depression. His mother worked long hours and often had more than one job. Luke felt alone in his own home. He started looking for a place to belong. School did not go well. He failed 9th grade. He also wrote troubling stories. Teachers later found those writings. The stories described disturbing scenes aimed at teachers and the principal. Many ended with the narrator imagining taking his own life. These writings were not just teenage upset. They showed a dark and angry state of mind. There was one bright spot for a while. He dated a girl named Christina Menifee. To Luke, Christina seemed to care for him. When the relationship ended, he said it devastated him. He could not eat and could not sleep. At one point, he put a gun to his head. He later told people the breakup felt like the end of everything. He later described the loss as a reason for wanting revenge. Luke met Grant Boyette as he grew more isolated. Boyette was older and charismatic. He led a small group of outsiders who called themselves the Croth. The group used satanic symbols and talked about the occult. They mixed that with strange readings of philosophy and nihilism. Boyette told Luke he understood his pain. He told Luke that he could do something big. In truth, Boyette pushed him toward harm as a way to gain power. One disturbing sign of Luke's decline was what he did to his own dog, Sparkles. With another Croth member, he hurt the dog. The dog lost his life. He later wrote about the act in his diary. The diary showed a boy who had lost empathy and felt satisfaction in cruelty. Members of the Croth began to talk about larger plans. They discussed starting fires and cutting phone lines. They spoke of carrying out incidents at school. The group even planned an escape route to Mexico and then to Cuba. Whether those plans were realistic or not, Luke became attached to them. On the night before October 1st, 1997, Luke told a fellow Croth member, "I'm going to end my mom in the morning." His mother, Mary Ann, was nearby and unaware of his plan. At dawn, Luke cut the phone lines to the house. He then armed himself with a sharp object and a baseball bat. He went to his mother inside their home. He struck her repeatedly and used the sharp object multiple times. The injuries to her chest and lungs ended her life. He was 16 at the time. The woman who had raised him was gone. He then took her car and drove to Pearl High School. Hidden under his trench coat was a Marlin Model 336 30-30 rifle. Around 8:06 in the morning, he entered the commons area where students gathered. His first target was Christina Menifee, his ex-girlfriend. He raised the rifle and fired at her at close range, causing her to pass instantly. To Luke, this was not random. He saw it as revenge for the girl he believed had abandoned him. Standing beside Christina was Lydia K. Dew, another student. Luke fired again and she passed. Panic spread through the commons. Students screamed and ran for safety as Luke continued to fire. 7 more students were struck by bullets and left wounded. Why he fired on other students after targeting Christina is hard to pin down. Was it random rage or a symbolic act against people he felt had mocked or rejected him? His writings give clues. He had written that life was the cruelest joke. In his mind, this was payback against a world that had ridiculed him. The incident ended when Assistant Principal Joel Myrick stepped in. Myrick kept a .45 caliber pistol in his truck. He pointed that gun at Luke, disarmed him, and held him until police arrived. Without Myrick, more people could have been harmed. After his arrest, Luke did not panic. During his statement, he said he had done it because "I loved her and she didn't care," referring to Christina. He admitted giving a manifesto to a classmate and asked that it be given to Grant Boyette. The manifesto described how society had pushed him and how he felt he was pushing back. When officers noticed his injured palm, Luke explained it was from harming his mother. His calm tone shocked investigators. He seemed both composed and oddly proud of what he had done. Luke faced two separate trials, one for his mother's case and another for the school incident. His defense argued that he was legally insane, but juries rejected that claim. On June 5, 1998, Luke was found guilty in his mother's case and sentenced to life in prison. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he answered, "No, sir." Hours later, he was found guilty again for ending the lives of Christina and Lydia and for wounding 7 others. He received 2 more life sentences, plus 7 terms of 20 years each. Altogether, he was given 3 life terms plus 140 years, to be served back to back. His earliest chance for parole will come in the year 2046, when he will be 65 years old. In court, he offered a short statement of regret. "I am sorry for the people I ended and the people I hurt. If they could have given the capital penalty in this case, I deserve it." Later, as he was led from the courtroom, he muttered, "I'm going to heaven now. Everything happens for a reason. It's God's will." The next 14-year-old has an IQ in the gifted range. So why did he use that intelligence to destroy his own family? Paris Lee Bennett was born in 1993 in Illinois. He grew up in a family with long-running problems. His mother was Charity Bennett, also called Charity Lee. She grew up believing her own mother had taken her father's life, even though a court found her not guilty. That belief affected Charity's childhood. It also shaped Paris's upbringing. Charity struggled with dependence, and her addiction came back in the months before the event. That relapse appears to have deeply affected Paris. It added to his anger and resentment. On the night of February 4th, 2007, the Super Bowl was on, and Charity was working late. Paris got a babysitter to leave the house. Around 11:30 at night, he went into his 4-year-old sister Ella's bedroom. He hurt her in an intimate way, then cut off her breathing, and then inflicted 17 deep wounds with a sharp object while she slept. Ella did not survive. Afterwards, Paris called a school friend and talked for 6 minutes. Only then did he call emergency services. In that call, he said he had seen Ella as a pumpkin-headed demon. He pretended to follow CPR instructions, but he was pacing and counting instead of doing CPR. Paris was tried in juvenile court. Texas law does not allow trying a 13-year-old as an adult in that situation. He pleaded guilty to the most serious homicide charge. The court gave the maximum juvenile sentence, 40 years, with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. When he was 19, he was moved to an adult prison. He remains in custody. He will first be eligible for parole in February 2027. If parole is denied, his release date would be February 2047. Psychiatrists evaluated Paris. They described traits that match antisocial personality disorder. Reporters used the word sociopathy. Some experts have questioned whether he can change. Charity, despite her pain, at first stayed in touch with Paris. Over time, she stopped visiting him. She said she did that because she felt he was a danger to her and to her younger son, Phoenix. She wrote that she had finally accepted it is okay to love him as my son, but really dislike the man he has become. She also closed the Ella Foundation she had created in memory of Ella, saying she had done what she set out to do. Why did Paris wait 6 minutes before calling emergency services? That pause suggests he acted in a planned way, not in a sudden panic. It looks like he wanted the shock to sink in and make the scene more painful for others. Charity later wrote that the wounds were slow and methodical, not frantic. Paris told detectives that making those wounds felt like cutting into a mattress or a marshmallow. In the next case, his mother made a shocking suggestion that changed everything, days before the incident. Barry Dale Loukaitis was born in 1981, in Washington State. He looked like an ordinary boy. Teachers called him smart and quiet. They also said he could be awkward. Things at home were different. His parents were Joanne Phillips and Terry Loukaitis. By the mid-1990s, their marriage was falling apart. Joanne found out Terry was having an affair. She became deeply depressed. She turned to Barry for support. She talked to him more than a parent should. She sometimes spoke to him like he was a partner. She shared very dark thoughts with him. A few days before the event at school, Joanne told Barry something shocking. She suggested that the two of them should end their lives together on Valentine's Day. Think about a 14-year-old boy hearing that from his mother. It changed what Barry felt and how he saw the world. School was hard for him. He was bright but isolated. He was not athletic. Other students mocked his clothes and his glasses. They also made fun of his family situation. The teasing hurt him deeply. One of the students who picked on him most was Manuel Vela Jr. Manuel was someone Barry later named when explaining why he acted. Barry also read and watched disturbing media. Investigators later found Stephen King's novel Rage in his room. That novel tells about a boy who makes his algebra teacher lose their life. He had also watched the Pearl Jam video, Jeremy. That video shows a bullied student carrying out revenge in a classroom. Those influences mixed with the bullying and the trouble at home. Barry also had untreated mental health issues. All of that built up inside him. On February 2, 1996, a snowstorm delayed school by 2 hours. Barry left home with a plan. He had taken weapons from his father's locked trunk. He carried a .30-30 hunting rifle, a .22 revolver, and a .25 semi-automatic pistol. He wore a long black duster coat to hide them. By the time the 5th period algebra class started, Barry sat in his seat. Then he pulled out the rifle and fired. The first shots struck Manuel Vela Jr. and Arnold Arnie Fritz. Both were 14 years old. They lost their lives. 13-year-old Natalie Hintz was hit in her arm and stomach. She fell but held on to life. Barry then fired at his teacher, 49-year-old Leona Cares. She had been writing on the board. A bullet hit her in the chest. She collapsed. The classroom filled with screams. Students scrambled under desks. For a few terrifying minutes, Barry controlled the room with weapons. People later said some of his words sounded rehearsed. He seemed to have imagined parts of this before. Then John Lane, the gym coach, ran to the classroom after hearing the shots. He found Barry holding students in the room. Lane offered himself and stepped forward. At one point, Lane lunged and wrestled the rifle away. He forced Barry to the ground. Several students helped hold him until police arrived. The incident lasted only a few minutes. In that short time, 3 people lost their lives. 1 person was seriously wounded, and the whole community was changed. Why would a 14-year-old do this? Barry later said he meant only to target Manuel. He said the rest were accidents. Investigators did not think that matched the planning they saw. He chose a day when routines were predictable. He took multiple weapons from a locked trunk. He hid them under a long coat. That looks like planning, not a sudden choice. Mental health professionals disagreed about his condition. Defense experts pointed to depression, bipolar signs, and possible delusions. The prosecution's expert diagnosed a long-term depressive condition called dysthymia. All agreed Barry was troubled. His parents' failing marriage left him without steady emotional support. Because of what happened, prosecutors asked to try him as an adult. The community reacted with shock and anger. Many felt little sympathy for a teenager who had caused so much harm. The trial started in 1997, when Barry was 16. He at first considered an insanity defense. His lawyers later dropped that plan. On September 24, 1997, the jury returned a guilty verdict. They found him guilty on 2 counts of first-degree taking of life, 1 count of second-degree taking of life, attempted first-degree taking of life, and 16 counts of aggravated abduction. The sentence was extremely long. He received 2 life terms plus 205 years, with no possibility of release. For a teenager, that meant he would very likely spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama that mandatory life without release for juveniles was unconstitutional. That decision allowed courts to reconsider some juvenile sentences. This opened a chance for Barry to be resentenced. In April 2017, Barry, then 36, appeared in court again. He spoke for the first time in more than 20 years. He addressed the victims' families. He said, "If people forgive me, it's because they are good. It's not anything I deserve." He told Manuel's family, "He was better than I am. I'm sorry." He admitted anger, fear, and jealousy led him to act. He said he turned those feelings outward instead of asking for help. Natalie Hintz, the survivor, also spoke. She described the lifelong scars she carries. She told Barry she forgave him. Coach John Lane asked Barry why he did it. Barry replied, "I was afraid, I was angry, and I was jealous." The judge later resentenced Barry to 189 years in prison. That was technically shorter, but it still meant he would not be released. Barry has now spent more than half his life behind bars. Reports say he took part in education programs. He earned a bachelor's degree. He worked as a teacher's aide for other people in prison. He even considered graduate study. None of that can change what happened in a classroom in 1996. Barry's attack came after years of family strain and bullying. The next story involves more trauma. How much pain does it take before a child decides destructive behavior is the answer? Evan Ramsay was born in 1981 in Anchorage, Alaska. His childhood broke down early. When he was 7 years old, his father was arrested after a standoff with police. His mother fell into a drinking addiction. That left Evan and his brothers with nowhere steady to turn. Soon after, their family home burned. The children went into foster care. For Evan, foster care did not feel safe. It became another source of harm. Between 1988 and 1991, Evan moved through 11 different foster homes. Each move meant another loss and less stability. In one of those homes, he was harmed in an inappropriate way. His younger brother later said that in another placement, foster children were paid to hurt Evan as a game. The mistreatment left deep marks. By age 10, Evan tried to take his own life. That attempt did not work. It showed how much pain he already carried. Eventually, Evan settled in Bethel, a remote Alaskan community. A foster mother became his legal guardian. For a while, there seemed to be hope for more stability. The past still affected him. He struggled with depression and with feeling rejected. He grew more convinced the world was against him. At Bethel Regional High School, things got worse. He was often bullied and mocked. Classmates nicknamed him Screech, after a goofy TV character. He faced daily put-downs. For a boy who felt abandoned, school felt like another battle. Bullying was not the only factor. Evan had trouble fitting in. He wanted acceptance. He began spending time with a small group of older boys. They later influenced him in harmful ways. Some of them, according to reports, egged him on. They encouraged his angry thoughts. They even showed him how to use a shotgun. They taught him how to hold, load, and fire it. Was that the spark? Could what followed have been stopped if people had reported what they heard? Teachers and classmates later said they knew Evan talked about destructive plans. Still, no one took him seriously at the time. In hindsight, those warnings look chilling. One cold February morning in Bethel, Evan, who was 16 years old, boarded a school bus. He had a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun hidden under his clothing. On the bus ride, nothing seemed unusual. But once he walked into the school, the morning changed. In the Commons area, Evan went toward a 15-year-old student, Josh Palacios. The two had clashed before. Evan saw Josh as someone who had disrespected him. He lifted the shotgun and fired. Josh collapsed and later did not survive his injuries. Two other students were hit by the same blast. They survived. The noise caused panic in the school. Teachers and students scrambled for safety. Some hid under tables, others ran for the doors. In the chaos, art teacher Ray Nathanis came into the room. She saw Evan with the shotgun. She tried to calm him. She begged him to stop. For a moment, it looked like he might listen. Then he fired into the ceiling and walked toward the main office. There, he confronted Principal Ron Edwards. The principal had been named in writings Evan left behind as someone he resented. Evan shot him twice, once in the back and once in the shoulder. Ron Edwards fell and did not survive his injuries. Police arrived within minutes. Evan was still walking the school halls with the shotgun. He fired once at officers, but the standoff did not last long. At one point, Evan raised the weapon to his chin. He appeared to prepare to end his life. Instead, he said, "I don't want to die." He set the gun down and gave himself up. In that moment, the plan he had hinted at to force officers to use fatal force failed. He had spoken about wanting life to end. When faced with the reality, he chose not to go through with it. That moment affected his defense in court. Why did Evan act that way at school? The immediate reason was revenge. He wanted payback for years of bullying, rejection, and humiliation. Investigators found a letter in his bedroom. It showed how he was thinking. In it, he wrote that he felt rejected and sick of how people treated him every day. He named the principal as a target. He wrote that life sucks and that he planned to harm others and himself. The letter shows a teenager pushed to despair. He believed lashing out would punish others and give him relief. His plan was to hurt and then escape life altogether. When the time came, he surrendered instead. His lawyers argued he did not truly mean to take lives. They said he only fired shots to draw police, so they would end his life. They called it a plan to force fatal action from officers. But the evidence of deliberate targeting, especially the shooting of Principal Edwards, weakened that defense. A grand jury indicted him on serious charges. During the trial, prosecutors said Evan acted with clear intent. They said he trained with the shotgun, chose his targets, and followed through with a planned sequence. The jury agreed. In April 1998, Evan was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree homicide, 1 count of attempted first-degree homicide, and 15 counts of third-degree causing injury. On December 2, 1998, Judge Mark I. Wood gave him a sentence of 210 years in prison. Years later, on appeal, one of his attempted first-degree convictions was overturned. That cut his sentence a bit. He was resentenced to about 198 years. Under Alaska law, he must serve 66 years before he can be considered for parole. That means he would be 85 years old in 2066 before there is any possibility of release. Evan was first sent to Spring Creek Correctional Center, Alaska's maximum security prison. Later, he moved to the Wildwood Correctional Complex. Life behind bars has replaced the quick end he once talked about. Instead of that, he faces decades of confinement. Evan has spoken in interviews from prison. In 2017, on the 20th anniversary of the school event, he reflected with regret. He said he had been looking for a way out. He said he wishes he could undo what he did. He said he was young and confused and that he did not fully understand what pulling the trigger meant. Even so, apologies and regret do not change what happened. 2 people lost their lives. A whole community carries the impact. The next case also involves a student who seemed well-liked but carried hidden struggles. Unlike Ramsay, the shooter was even younger. He was only 13 when he brought a weapon into his classroom. Nathaniel Brazill was born in 1986 in Florida. He was raised by his mother, Polly Powell. His childhood was difficult. His mother had relationships that included heavy drinking and domestic mistreatment. Police were often called to their home. Brazill later said he did not fully understand and did not directly witness much of that behavior. At school, he came across as mild-mannered and likable. He played in the school band. He was named Student of the Month in December 1999. During his 7th grade year, his grades dropped. He became afraid he could no longer pretend to be a successful student. A letter he wrote to a teacher hinted at ending his own life and trailed off with, "I do not think I am going to 8th grade. If I do go to 8th grade, perhaps my teacher," before ending. On May 26, 2000, the final day of school, the 13-year-old was suspended for throwing water balloons. He went home. He took a small Raven handgun, reported as .25 caliber, from a cookie tin, in the home of a man he called his grandfather, though the man was not his biological grandfather. He then returned to Lake Worth Middle School in Florida. At the school, he told a counselor he had a weapon. He said, "Watch, I am going to be all over the news." Back in class, he asked to speak with 2 girls. The teacher, Barry Grunow, refused. When Brazill drew the weapon, it discharged. The projectile struck Grunow in the head. Brazill was charged as an adult with a top-level charge related to causing another person's loss of life. He also faced a separate charge for pointing a weapon at another teacher. The prosecution argued the act was planned. The defense said the weapon fired by accident because Brazill thought the safety was on. The jury found him guilty of a second-degree charge related to causing a loss of life, which means they did not find pre-planned intent. They also convicted him for pointing the weapon at another teacher. When the verdict was read, Brazill, who had been calm, quietly turned to his attorney and said, "Not too bad." Later, out of public view, he cried. The case raised the question of how a student seen as well-behaved and favored by teachers could bring a weapon to school. It shows how a child's private pain can be hidden until it appears suddenly. In July 2001, Brazill, now 14, stood before Circuit Judge Richard Wennett in West Palm Beach. He wore a bright red jumpsuit and was shackled. He showed little emotion. Under Florida law, a mandatory minimum of 25 years applies when a firearm is used. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in prison. The sentence included 2 years of house arrest after release and 5 years of probation. He was given credit for the 428 days he had already served. At sentencing, Brazill spoke about remorse for the first time. He said, "Words cannot really explain how sorry I am, but they are all I have." He also said he did not mean to cause harm to his teacher. The prosecution had earlier described him as determined to cause a loss of life. The jury's decision avoided a life sentence. Brazill remains at Wakulla Correctional Institution Annex. His projected release date is May 18, 2028. While incarcerated, he earned his GED and a paralegal certification. The next case shows how an isolated teenager, just 16 years old, turned brutal inside his own home. Daniel Petric was born in 1991. He grew up in Wellington, Ohio. His family lived in nearby Brighton Township. His father, Mark Petric, worked as a Pentecostal minister at New Life Assembly of God. His mother, Susan, known as Sue, kept a caring home. People who knew Daniel said he was friendly. Church members and school staff called him an average student. He liked the Bible. No one saw warning signs in his behavior. A snowboarding accident left Daniel with a serious spinal injury. He developed a staph infection. He spent almost a year at home while he recovered. During that time, a friend, Jonathan Johnson, introduced him to the Halo video game series. Daniel began to play for very long stretches, sometimes for 7 to 18 hours at a time. His father disapproved. He forbade Daniel from playing graphic games. He put the Halo 3 disc and a 9mm Taurus PT-92 handgun in a safe. 1 week after his parents took the game away, on October 20th, 2007, Daniel used his father's key to open the safe. He took the Halo 3 disc and a loaded handgun. That evening, at about 7 in the evening, he moved behind his parents who were sitting on the living room couch. He quietly said, "Would you close your eyes? I have a surprise for you." Then he fired the gun. His mother was hit in the head, arms, and chest and did not survive. His father was hit in the head and lost feeling from his injuries. Daniel then tried to make the scene look like his father had done something to himself by placing the gun in his father's hand and saying, "Hey Dad, here's your gun, take it." His sister, Heidi, and her husband arrived earlier than expected. Daniel told them their parents were fighting, which was not true. When they heard groaning, they forced the door open. They found both parents hurt. Heidi called 911. Daniel left in the family van. He took only the Halo 3 disc with him. He was arrested soon after. Daniel chose to have a judge decide his case instead of a jury. The bench trial was held from December 15th through 17th, 2008, at Lorain County Court of Common Pleas in Elyria. Judge James Burge was the judge. In court, Daniel cried. His father said Daniel deeply regretted what happened. At the time, Daniel still did not understand why he had done it. The prosecutor, Anthony Sillo, said the act was planned and deliberate. Evidence showed planning for about a week and timing to match the sister's visit. The prosecutor argued Daniel tried to make everyone think it was followed by self-harm. Daniel's defense lawyer, James Kersey, did not dispute the facts. He argued Daniel had developed an addiction to dark video games that affected his sense of finality. The defense said video game characters can come back after they are put out of play. That, the lawyer argued, might have made it hard for Daniel to grasp that real life has no restart. The defense also pointed to his long recovery, health stress, and his youth. They described him as a broken teen rather than a person who wanted to cause harm. The judge rejected the video game argument. He said the condition was not shown to be a medically proven reason to reduce responsibility. He also noted Daniel had planned the act for weeks. For the judge, the planning meant accountability could not be reduced. The judge found Daniel guilty of aggravated charges for causing a fatality, of attempted aggravated charges for causing a fatality, and of tampering with evidence. Because of his age, Ohio law prevented a capital sentence. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 23 years, which was the minimum allowed. The court record shows the aggravated fatality charge carried a minimum of 20 years to life, plus additional years for gun use. The attempted aggravated fatality charge carried a minimum of 10 years. The tampering with evidence charge carried 5 years. All of those terms were set to run at the same time. At sentencing, Daniel was 17. He appeared tearful and emotional. He sniffled, shook his head, and held back tears. He did not speak when given the chance. His father asked the judge for mercy. The father said Daniel was sorry and often said, "Dad, I miss Mom. I miss Mom." There is no clear record of Daniel saying the words, "I'm sorry," or "I regret this," at sentencing. Most of what was reported came from his father. Daniel was moved to Grafton Correctional Institution. Credit was given for time already served, which was 592 days. With that credit, his earliest parole eligibility date is November 2nd, 2030. His first parole hearing is set for September 2030. A quiet town in Ohio changed after that night. A teen who once shared baseball and Bible stories with his family did something that shocked those who knew him. People still ask how a young person could reach that point. Was it long hours with graphic games combined with pain and isolation? Or was it something else in his life that led to this outcome? His father's words, "Dad, I miss Mom," were repeated in court, and they left a space for questions that did not have easy answers. Sarah Marie Johnson was born in 1987. She grew up in Bellevue, Idaho. She was 16 when the events began that changed everything. She was blonde and athletic. She played volleyball and did cheerleading at Wood River High School in Haley. Many people saw her as a typical teenager. On the outside, her life looked comfortable. Her parents were Alan Scott Johnson and Diane Johnson. Alan was 46 and worked as a building contractor. Diane was 52 and was a homemaker. They were well known in town. Sarah had an older brother, Matt, who lived on his own. Trouble started when Sarah began a relationship with Bruno Santos. Bruno was 19 and had moved from Mexico. Sarah's parents did not approve. They thought he was too old for her. They told her she could not see him. They grounded her. Sarah took the ban very hard. She felt she could not live without him. Losing him felt unbearable to her. On the morning of September 2nd, 2003, at around 6:20 in the morning, Sarah went into the guest house behind the family home. The tenant, Mel Spiegel, was not there. The tenant kept a Winchester .264 bolt-action rifle in the guest house. She took the rifle and loaded it. She went into her parents' bedroom. Diane was still in bed. Sarah raised the rifle and fired one shot at close range. The shot struck Diane in the head. Medical examiners later said the injury was not survivable. Alan came out of the shower after he heard the sound. Sarah then fired at him. The shot hit him in the chest. He walked into the hallway and collapsed. Investigators later found heavy red spatter on walls and ceiling. The scene showed sudden and aggressive harm to the household. Sarah then tried to arrange the scene to look like something else. She wore a pink bathrobe backwards while she fired. She later threw the robe, a left leather glove, and a latex glove into an outdoor trash bin. The robe had stains on it. The gloves had gunshot residue. DNA from the latex glove matched Sarah. Neighbors said they heard two loud sounds that morning. Some neighbors saw Sarah outside. She called out that someone had shot her parents. People noticed she seemed oddly calm. Her hair was neat. Later that day, she went to volleyball practice. She looked distracted but controlled. Police found reasons to doubt the story of an outside intruder. Friends said Sarah had argued with her mother about Bruno. Investigators learned Sarah had been grounded and forbidden from seeing him. For the prosecutors, the motive was clear. They said Sarah wanted her parents out of the way so she could continue the relationship. Forensics played a major role. Gunshot residue matched the gloves found. DNA matched Sarah. There was no sign of forced entry to support her claim of an outside person. One detail raised questions later. Some fingerprints on the rifle and on some ammunition did not match Sarah or the guesthouse tenant. Her defense later argued that someone else might have handled the rifle. The courts accepted other explanations. They said those prints could have come from anyone who had touched the weapon earlier. The rest of the evidence pointed to Sarah. The trial began in Ada County in early 2005. The courtroom was full. Sarah looked very young at the defense table. Prosecutors described the robe, the gloves, the rifle, and the red spatter in detail. They said the evidence showed planning. They argued Sarah acted deliberately because she had been forbidden to see Bruno. The defense pointed to the unidentified prints and suggested mistakes in the investigation. They argued investigators had rushed to judgment because of how Sarah behaved after the incident, but the jury found the forensic evidence stronger. On March 16, 2005, Sarah was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree charges, each with a firearm enhancement. The judge handed down 2 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 15 years. Sarah was 18 at the time of sentencing. Sarah appealed several times. She argued her lawyers had been ineffective and that the unidentified fingerprints needed new review. Each appeal failed. In 2008, the Idaho Supreme Court upheld the conviction. Sarah remains in custody at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Melinda Loveless was the youngest of 3 daughters. She was born in 1975. Her parents were Marjorie and Larry Loveless. They lived in New Albany, Indiana. Home life was unstable. Her father, Larry, showed troubling behavior. He sometimes wore his wife's and daughter's underwear. He was overly jealous, and he hurt family members physically. He also held a short job with the police. He had problems after serving in Vietnam. The family joined Graceland Baptist Church. There, Larry became a lay preacher for a time. His behavior later got worse. He tried to force himself on a woman. He watched Melinda when she was alone. Once, Marjorie hit him with a sharp object. After these events, the family left the church. They then fell into a pattern of heavy drinking and more conflict. Melinda's childhood had many problems. There was chaos and many secrets. There was also ongoing harm inside the home. This background does not explain everything that followed, but it is important to know. On the night of January 10, 1992, 4 teenage girls planned to meet someone. The girls were Melinda Loveless, age 16, Lori Tackett, age 17, Hope Rippey, age 15, and Tony Lawrence, age 15. They lured 12-year-old Shanda Scherer by saying she would meet their mutual friend Amanda Heverin. Once Shanda got in the car, Loveless showed a sharp object and threatened her. During the drive, the threats turned into long, aggressive actions. At an abandoned spot called the Witch's Castle near Madison, Indiana, the girls forced Shanda to take off most of her clothes, so she was left in her undergarments. They slapped her and hit her. Loveless pressed Shanda's face into her knee, and her braces caused a deep wound in Shanda's mouth. Loveless tried to cut Shanda's throat. With Rippey helping to hold her, Loveless and Tackett used a sharp object on Shanda many times. They also used rope to press against her neck. When the girls thought Shanda did not survive, they put her in the trunk of a car. Minutes later, they heard her screaming from inside. Tackett then used the sharp object again. The group drove to a remote gravel road. There they poured gasoline on Shanda and set her on fire. Loveless went back and poured more gasoline. At dawn, they left the scene. They stopped at a fast food restaurant for breakfast. They laughed and compared Shanda's burned remains to sausages. Hunters found Shanda later that morning. Toni Lawrence soon went with her parents to the sheriff's office and made a full statement. Within 48 hours, all 4 girls were arrested. The 4 were handled in adult court. Each took a plea agreement so they would not face the severest adult sentence. At their sentencing hearings, the defense teams described the girls' troubled backgrounds. Lawyers mentioned Loveless's history of harm in her family. They also spoke about Tackett's mental health problems. Loveless and Tackett pleaded guilty to charges that included causing the victim's loss of life, unlawful confinement, and setting a fire. Each received a sentence of 60 years. Rippey received a sentence of 60 years with 10 years suspended. That sentence was later reduced on appeal to 35 years. Toni Lawrence, who had cooperated early on, received 20 years for unlawful confinement. Loveless appealed parts of her case, citing her youth, mental health, and questions about her legal counsel. The Indiana Supreme Court reviewed the case and, in 1994, it kept the sentence in place. Loveless served more than 26 years in prison. She was released from the Indiana Women's Prison on September 5, 2019. Tackett was released on January 11, 2018. Rippey was released in 2006. Lawrence was released in 2000. By 2025, Melinda Loveless is 49 and living under parole supervision. The victim's mother, Jacque Vaught, created a scholarship in Shanda's name. She also supported a prison dog training program that Loveless took part in. Those choices by the victim's family caused a strong public reaction and debate. On the morning of December 4, 1986, a 14-year-old named Christopher Hans walked into Fergus High School in Lewistown, Montana. He was carrying a handgun. He was angry about a low grade in French. He wanted to get back at the teacher he blamed. That teacher, Lavon Simonfee, was not in class that day. A substitute named Henrietta Smith was covering the lesson. Hans went into the room anyway. He fired his gun at Smith at very close range. She did not survive the injury. As he ran out of the classroom, he fired more shots in the hallways and outside the building. The vice principal, John Moffat, and 2 students were hurt by those shots. Hans then ran home. Police surrounded the house. His parents brought him outside and handed him to the officers. People in Lewistown were stunned. Incidents like this were rare in 1986. A 14-year-old causing such harm over a school grade felt almost impossible. Investigators learned that Hans had been upset about his French mark. Other students said he had talked about harming the teacher he blamed. When the regular teacher was absent, he treated the substitute as the person he would hold responsible. Hans was a freshman at Fergus High. Public records from that time give only limited personal details. He lived in Lewistown with his family. There are no reliable public reports of a long history of prior arrests or aggressive behavior before this event. The materials from the state that followed the case focus on his mental state and on the planning he carried out in the days before the incident. The stated motive was revenge. Hans believed the teacher had failed him in French. He wanted to punish the person he blamed. When the regular teacher was not there, he treated the substitute as a replacement for that target. Witness accounts and later summaries link his actions to anger over the grade. A key question people ask is whether Hans intended to end Smith's life. The record shows his intended target was Lavon Simonfee, the French teacher. He went ahead even when she was not present. That choice influenced how prosecutors described his planning and his intent. Hans was arrested the same day. Prosecutors filed a number of serious charges. He faced a deliberate homicide charge connected to what happened to Henrietta Smith. He was also charged with attempted deliberate homicide for the injury to John Moffat. In addition, there were 2 felony counts for causing serious injury to the students who were shot. Because he was 14, the case began in youth court. The state asked that the case be moved so he could be tried in district court as an adult. After a hearing that described his preparation and planning, youth court ordered the transfer. The state Supreme Court later upheld that decision. Why was a 14-year-old tried as an adult? In Montana, a youth can be transferred when the court finds the seriousness of the offense and other factors, like planning, make adult prosecution appropriate. In Hans's case, witnesses said he had prepared for several days. The court considered that evidence and ordered the transfer. The state high court agreed in March 1988. The defense told the court it would argue that Hans had a mental disease or defect that affected his ability to form the mental state required for the charges. The court ordered a full evaluation at the state hospital. Clinicians spent more than 2 months assessing his competency to stand trial and his mental condition at the time of the incident. The report found he was competent. It showed that, while he had diagnoses such as severe conduct disorder and traits described as schizotypal, evaluators concluded he still had the capacity to act knowingly and purposely under Montana law when he fired the gun. A defense expert later agreed that he was not experiencing hallucinations during the event. These findings appear in the appellate record. On May 10, 1988, after extended court discussions about charges, possible penalties, and rights he would waive, Hans changed his pleas to guilty on all 4 counts. The judge accepted those pleas. The defense asked that he be sentenced under provisions for mentally ill offenders, or that mandatory minimums be reduced. The court rejected those requests and moved to sentencing. In June 1988, the district court handed down a long sentence. For the deliberate homicide count connected to Henrietta Smith, the court imposed 100 years, plus 3 years for using a weapon. For the attempted deliberate homicide count for John Moffat, the court imposed another 100 years, plus 3 years for the weapon. That second sentence was ordered to run after the first. For each of the 2 felony counts related to the students, the court added 10 years plus 2 years for the weapon. Those 2 counts were ordered to run at the same time as the first count. The court labeled him a dangerous offender for purposes of parole. Altogether, the total sentence added up to 206 years, according to the formal record. After sentencing, Hans briefly considered an appeal. A notice of appeal was filed and later withdrawn. He later sought post-conviction relief. He argued, among other points, ineffective help from his lawyer and problems in how mental health reports had been handled. In 1997, the Montana Supreme Court rejected those claims and left the conviction and sentences in place. The court considered his youth. It also considered the planning that preceded the event, the fact that a teacher who had done nothing to him was shot, the injuries to the school administrator, and the trauma suffered by students and staff. The court reviewed the mental health evaluations but concluded he had formed the intent required by law. The dangerous offender label signaled the court's view that future release should be handled cautiously. The appellate record sets out these points in more detail. Hans served decades in Montana custody. Over the years, he appeared before the State Board of Pardons and Parole. In April 2015, the board approved his release once he completed required steps. He was paroled in June 2015. By February 2018, public reports indicated he was living in Nebraska while on parole. The loss of Henrietta Smith left deep grief for her family in the small town. John Moffat survived his injury. He later spoke publicly about what happened and how it affected him. His interviews over the years have helped explain how the event unfolded and how the school responded in the aftermath.